Welcome to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham. Today, we're joined by Ross Rich, CEO and co-founder of Accord. Ross has a unique journey, starting out in the music industry before moving to sales and eventually launching Accord, a leading sales collaboration platform.
Ross shares how his career shifts helped him be a great founder, the challenges of building a go-to-market tool from scratch, and the value of consistent, high-quality sales processes.
We, of course, also touch on how AI and data are transforming deal management and get his takes on the future of go-to-market. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the ZI Labs podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest, none other than Ross Rich, the CEO and founder of Accord.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. We have so many questions for you. We want to talk all things go-to-market. We want to talk deal execution, go-to-market in data broadly. But maybe just first tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Yeah, so started Accord about 4 years ago after being a sales professional myself. It's kind of the thing that I wish I had as a salesperson and leader. But before that, maybe that's for another time and drinks after, but I was actually in the music industry before getting into the sales world. I was at Columbia Records in LA and New York, but...
No, that's for now, actually. We
okay,
want to talk about that. Give us a little bit of that time and maybe some of the learnings and how that experience helped shape some of the things you're doing today.
Yeah, it's a great question and definitely helped me be successful jumping into the sales world. I would say really tough personalities to deal with, a lot of high egos, a lot of do it yesterday, and I worked for two bosses that each had their own person under them and didn't necessarily get along that well. Sorry if you're listening. I feel like I'm rat here. Didn't get along well, and they each had their own, associate. So I had to figure out every day what balls I was going to drop. Period. It was just prioritization. I was going to do a bad job every day. What couldn't I drop as the most important things, and dealing with different personalities and all that stuff was the first one in, last one out, and still felt like I was, terrible at the gig and not meeting expectations. And I think that really helped me when I got into sales, have that ownership mindset, be able to prioritize really well, work with a number of different stakeholders. And it was an interesting learning experience going from Canada, very nice people, very kind, very patient, to New York City, and going up there and doing my thing. So it was a cool experience.
This is like sourcing artists. You're trying to find the next star. You're trying to sign them.
Both. I was working with these guys, and I was managing artists on the side. So in university before, I was managing artists, putting on events, tours, all that kind of stuff on the side with my brother. That was our first co-founding experience together. And so I was, trying to live the dream, be, Ari Gold and Entourage, and I ended up being Lloyd. So I left that and got into the world of SaaS sales, as one does.
Yeah.
And what was it like being at Stripe at that time? I mean, we've had a few folks from Stripe on the pod. It's, they've definitely shared their views of sort of how it evolved, and it was this sort of like living and breathing engine, and it's very different even today than it was maybe like a few years ago. What was like when you were there, and sort of like how did that set you up for success?
Well, first I was kind of like, why did you hire me? I was in the music industry, and there's all these folks, from that went to Harvard Business School and Stanford and worked at Google and Twitter and all these incredible companies, and I didn't even know what an API stood for, I think, when I got the job there. But I fell in love with it, and it was interesting when I reflect on, kind of the difference between Columbia Records and starting at Stripe. I'm super passionate about music. I didn't really care much I didn't know about the world of payments and, APIs and integrated banking and all this stuff, but I ended up loving that job 100 times more than my experience at Columbia. And everyone's like, oh, that's so cool. I'd love to be in the music industry. Like, no, you wouldn't. And it ends up, I think, being about who you're dealing with day to day. And especially if you're in sales, it's more about your customers even than internal folks. And I just loved working on these really complicated problems with the product. How are we going to go international? How are we going to offer these new payment methods that are coming out? How are we going to deal with all the security issues and fraud management and blah, blah, blah. And I just love every new customer, every new deal was like a really challenging intellectual project to work on. And that's what really got me into sales and stimulated me intellectually. How do you deal with different personas and people, and all along trying to close the thing and not just be a consultant. So I just, lived both sales, read every sales book. We started getting training sessions with the legendary Skip Miller from M3 Learning. Fell in love with that, and then also the technology. I think that's also something super underrated, is being an expert in the space. I took coding boot camps, both at Stripe that they offered as well as externally. I learned, front end, back end, basics of engineering and stuff. So when I could talk to not just, a CEO, VP, I could talk to the engineers and learn really why it was better. And that was our competitive advantage, coming from a bottoms up developer engineering first thing to a sales led motion. So yeah, it was just the intellectual stimulation from all that I absolutely loved. Yeah.
And what lessons did you take from, maybe we'll just break it into two parts, the go-to-market, at Stripe, and the way that they thought about product and engineering? Like, what lessons did you take away from those times at Stripe that you're directly applying at Accord?
Mostly cultural. I think the obsession on the user, like they had a bunch of values, but number one, and probably would hear from the co-founders the most, is users first. And not just buyers. And I always wondered, like, we're talking about customers in sales, but why users first? And I always thought that was backwards, but I really understand in building Accord, like, yes, you're selling to people, and we sell to RevOps, and we sell to enablement leaders, and we sell to, VPs of sales and CROs, but at the end of the day, everyone cares about the impact that you can deliver, which is at the end user level. So I think that is a value that I've taken to Accord, and why we really spent the first 2 years building Accord, not even selling, but working with top sellers and frontline managers and even end buyers to make sure this thing worked at the end of the day for the users before figuring out how to build a business around it. That's one thing that I really took from it. On the product and engineering side, very hard to articulate, but just the bar, like, I would say by far that's the reason Stripe was wildly successful even before they had any sales team. They were a multi-billion-dollar business before picking up the phone or emailing customers back. It was all self-serve API docs, and I think just that understanding of what great looks like, not necessarily being able to articulate and be able to code like that, but when we started building our engineering team and product team, just understanding that, like, the level of excellence you need to succeed to build a SaaS business, to build a product-based business is very different. And I think that's why people always ask me, like, why wasn't Accord built before? What's the unique thing? I think a lot of it is the people with the understanding of what it's like to close deals day to day, and the details of deal execution are typically very different people that are building the product themselves. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think we have necessarily the greatest go-to-market tools in the world, is because the problems are so far for the people that really build the product.
How are you, other than sort of hiring the right people, like, how are you continuing to, like, build that piece into the culture as you continue to build Accord?
Well, one of them is just luckily having an amazing CTO and technical partner, Wayne Pan, who's multi-time founder and product leader and all things R&D, having that partnership from day one. I think staying close to the team and the product. Like, we use Accord to sell Accord and onboard every customer. We've done that from day one, and I've been really close to the product. Like, the field is the truth, and hearing from customers. Obviously, they need to align philosophically to what you're trying to do and not just get pulled in a million different directions. But yeah, staying close to customers, making sure you have a really high bar for your team. I think spending time with prospects and customers will always reorient you in the right direction. So.
How much of your time, like, week to week, are you spending personally still, like, being that in touch with what's going on in the field?
It's a great question. Reflecting on this, I think I got a lot of bad advice as a CEO and a founder to work on the business, not in the business. Well, before 20, 50 plus $1 million ARR, the best people that I've talked to is you need to work in the business every day, and you are the business. You're evangelizing, you're building, even if it's not a new category, a new way of doing things in slightly a different way, and having your own vision of what that should look like. You need to be working in it. And I think, there was a point of time where it probably got too far away. Sorry, to directly answer your question, probably like 60, 70% of my time. And but it allows us to make better decisions that are the executive level decisions. It allows us to move quickly on what should we prioritize next. Well, hey, I've talked to our top 3 prospects and top 3 existing customers. All of them are saying to start the year, account planning is number 1. Hey, maybe that's a signal that we should probably start working on figuring out how to be a better solution for that, or stakeholder mapping, or other pieces of the product. Would I have the same level of conviction? And would we do that a year later if I was working on the business and doing some SWOT analysis of that? Or, hey, these are the types of people we want to work with. They're the most passionate about what we're solving. They're going to guide us in the right direction. They want us to do this. That's what we should probably be doing. So that's, I think, allowed to do some of the more, work on the business type stuff when you're in it and have that level of conviction.
Yeah, it's like you're working on the business, and then Paul Graham does founder mode tweets, and you're like, perfect, that's my permission, I get back in there.
Well, I honestly, having these conversations with people before, like, I've shared this learning with, other investors and other founders, and I think there was this great tweet like years ago. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like the best kept secret in startups and in building businesses is that micromanagement is just like a very negative like framing and point of view on people getting really involved and caring about the details. And there's obviously a way to do it, and I'm not saying that, you know, you have full right to be, you know, a dick and treat people wrongly and step on their toes, and well, there's a way to just be a normal human and respect someone. But I cared the most when my manager cared the most. I cared the most when I had a leader who could help me get better. And I think that's just a frame of mind that for some reason maybe get lost. We have this like really negative connotation of that, but
you talked earlier about using Accord to sell Accord. That's a bit meta on both sides, right? Because your team needs to use it to sell it, and then the buyer...
And then they experience it on the buyer side.
Right, and then that must both create, hopefully, a better buying experience, obviously, but then also, ideally, demand for like, well, we should buy all of our shit like this, right? Talk about how you've tried to create that flywheel with every deal, I assume, to sort of get them embedded into the product.
Yeah, so we're kind of talking about two things, right? First is when we're selling, the buyer answering their number one question and pushback that we get being a new type of solution is, will my customers engage? And then we'll go through the first part of the process and I'll say, well, did you engage? What did you think? And they said, well, it was actually super helpful for me to share this with a couple colleagues. I'm like, yeah, exactly. We're not doing anything different than what top sellers have done for decades. There was, I forget what they call it back in the day with like, it was Miller Hyman or Sandler of like these like blueprint pages of a deal. And it's basically Accord. It's like, why are they buying? Who needs to be involved? What are the steps in the process? All that stuff on a piece of paper. We're just doing that collaboratively with customers, which is kind of like the modern day Google Docs and Sheets. So they see it and they're like, yeah, this is obviously makes sense and made it easier for me to do my job. I can imagine customers doing it. So that's nice to kind of validate that. But the coolest thing is when folks become clients on all of their leads and deals and onboardings, they share that. And we get a lot of our customers through their clients having such a great experience and saying, why aren't we doing this with our clients? Which is, you'd think is kind of weird with your customers being like, why, this Accord thing is cool, but they're saying we're delivering such a great customer experience, they want to do things like us. So it becomes this kind of like, you know, win-win-win scenario for us, for our clients that are blowing the minds of their customers, but also their end customers who are like, there's a different way of doing this that we can be bringing to our business. So.
Can you talk to me about the attribution of that? Because that referral process is like you're like a few steps removed. Like, how are you quantifying like that amount of demand that's coming through sort of that customer channel?
It's a great question. It's something that we've been hypersensitive to from day one, and we've actually never done anything in the product or marketing or sales to accelerate that flywheel, because we really respect our customers and their relationships with their clients, that we should be providing such a great experience both from our product and how we're onboarding them to create that wow moment where they can go out and find us. So we haven't done a great job around attribution other than people mentioning it in like a demo form or on the call. So it probably happens more often than not. We probably have roughly 10 to 20% attribution of all deals coming from that off our smaller base to start. But it could be larger, or like maybe they saw it once and then ended up going to a different company and then it brought up separately. So who knows, but that's been really cool to validate the impact of the product. Like, that's what I find coolest. Yes, it's a cool thing to pitch to VCs and be like, we can grow way faster because of this network effect. The cooler thing to me is like, wow, this is not just working for the sellers, but they're genuinely creating such a great experience that someone on the other end would change the way that they've been doing things because of that buyer experience. Yeah.
Did you intentionally build a platform? Because essentially you're like building a community, right? Where that like
no, this was no intent whatsoever to that. No. Yeah, it's obviously in the big vision pitch, but like the intent is to up-level sales teams and how they're executing with customers. Super cool that they're doing such a great job that they'd be willing to explore Accord. But again, we don't market. We don't say, hey, here's your thing. It's very like branded for the person that bought Accord and the end customer. So all the branding is like the two logos of the folks that are working together, not Accord. So
can you just tell us like what was the aha moment before you were like, yeah, I must go off and build this thing?
That's a great story actually. Yeah, the aha moment, I remember it was I got promoted from kind of like the junior sales team to the senior sales team. We weren't super segmented, but there was kind of like, you know, the younger sellers and the more experienced sellers, and I got promoted. And obviously I'm super competitive, so I'm like, I want to be at the top of the leaderboard of the senior sellers now. Like I have a chip on my shoulder, I have something to prove. And so I remember looking through all of our, you guys will like this from a data perspective, all the close-loss deals, and from like the worst sellers or the people that didn't care as much on the senior team, because I was like, there's probably something here, you know, instead of doing just the cold outbound, the signals, there's probably something here that is winnable. And I was doing a bunch of outbound, not getting replies. Finally, I got one, this company in New York. I'll never forget it. It's called Adore Me. And there was like this fast fashion company for women. And I get a response from the COO and the CFO being like, great timing. We're making a decision the next 2 weeks. We talked to you before. It was too expensive, but we might be going to this company. Happy to have a conversation. Quick call. They're having a meeting tomorrow. The right stakeholders were in town. The CTO was in town from Europe. And I'm like, oh, great. I happen to be in New York tomorrow. So obviously book flights, middle seat, San Francisco, overnight to New York, meet up with the guy that was running New York at the time. I'd never done an on-site pitch in my life. This is my first big boy deal. Prep everything, blah, 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 40 slides, have it dialed. They're a French company, by the way, too. So the COO gets in late, do the intros. We're waiting for him. He's the decision maker. Puts his feet up on the table, pulls out his phone. How long is this meeting? I got about 15 minutes. I'm like, hey, I set this up with all the stakeholders. Hour-long meeting. We're going to go through this. I have all the plan dialed in my head and super structured because I'm super nervous. And he's like, okay, what are we talking about today? I'm like, you're the one who replied, who wanted to set this meeting. I'm thinking here as a seller, you're thinking about this as much as I am. Obviously not. I'm a noob here. And so we go through the deck. He's not paying attention. I'm clicking through. Okay, shit, I got to find something that he's going to pay attention to. And I find the one slide I spent a ton of time on talking about their checkout process and how it would be different on Stripe. And it was really criticizing the way that they were doing and how we could do it better. That was the moment, the challenger sale, teach them something about something. This sparks the whole conversation between the COO, the CFO, the CTO, and why the guys the CTO is this is why I'm excited about Stripe, because we can change these things and we can have modern payment methods and blah, blah, blah. And the CFO is, well, it costs more, da, 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 da. The COO is like, whatever, we just want to make more money. Which got me the right to meet with the CFO after. He was like, you guys are more expensive, but it sounds like you can help with conversions. I built this whole shared doc and sheet about how I was thinking about it. And we get on Zoom. He starts editing it. He's like, I don't believe this. I don't believe this. I kind of believe this. I kind of believe this. Don't believe this. I'm like, cool. So let's focus on the things that you believe around the ROI. We build it together. And that was the aha moment of you need to challenge customers. You need to teach them something and have a strong point of view. And you need to build something that is believable, and it needs input from the client. And I felt like all the sales that I learned before was pitching, having the right thing to say at the right time, and all this stuff. And what really hit me was it's about being trusted, earning the right to show them something so that they can give input on what you're doing. That's not just going to happen. So you need to focus on it, have the right information, blah, blah, blah. So long story short, the learning was do the hard work, learn about their business, have a point of view, teach them something specific about how your product helps them with something, get them to the table, work with the right folks to actually collaborate. And that's the truth. That's what they're going to believe. Not just here's this great pitch and deck and whatever. So.
And let's talk. Go deeper.
Amazing. That story's really good. I mean, it's just it really is this sales is collaborative, and we say it and we know it and we feel it. But when we prep for a sales conversation or a really important meeting, it's very from the perspective of you. It's very one-sided. You're going in there to make them believe X, Y, Z, and you kind of forget that most of that meeting is going to come.
You forget the conversation,
them, right? Most of it's going to come from them.
Yes, and on that point, before I lose it, we focus so much, and this is why I felt like I needed to build a tool for it, and I never would have thought in a million years I would build a go-to-market tool. But what I was so passionate about was all the things, how I tried to get this to the rest of the team. I had this moment, I was like, holy shit, this is how I want all the deals. So I stayed at the top of the leaderboard for 16 quarters, all this stuff. It was impossible to impart in Salesforce fields. It was impossible to impart changing stage names. It was impossible to impart on Confluence docs and playbooks and PowerPoints and Notion docs. It's internal focus. All of the things we have as sellers, it doesn't help you translate to the customer. So that was the idea behind Accord is how can we build it into the seller's workflow so it feels organic to do these things and you're kind of default sharing it. And that's what kind of also is a sticking point for a lot of people that are looking at us are oh, but this is shared. We have a close plan today that lives inside of Salesforce. Or, well, we have these fields, we track it, we score all our deals on Medic with this sheet and 1, 2, 3 and how well we have. I'm like, but how you get it as the CRO, because you're an expert and that's why you're the CRO or VP of sales. Does your average seller on your team understand how to translate those Medic fields and all that stuff to the customer conversation and that collaboration? So
you talked about sort of sales process, whatever, Medic, there's a million different versions of this.
Advice, whatever.
Right. Just talk about the importance of standardized playbooks and clear criteria for driving the deal forward. What have you seen work best for go-to-market teams?
Yeah, well, to start, I wasn't a believer when I started selling. I felt like a script I was so allergic to. I'm like, what? I'm shit at sales. I need to say the exact words. Isn't that the point of my job? Is to figure out when I'm talking to someone, what I should say. Because I came from the startup, we didn't have any of this stuff. We were literally responding to tickets out of user voice and Zendesk versus Salesforce at the time. Like it was, we didn't have a playbook, so I didn't understand the value of it. And I kind of intuited it myself and read and listened and blah, 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 and learned the talk tracks from the top reps. I think looking at how the team scaled and now working with over 125 go-to-market teams at Accord, I think I realized for the top folks, they're going to intuit the best talk track and it's going to work for them. The group I'm talking about is probably like 3 standard deviations from the norm. This is probably the top 10%. If you're being conservative, probably to really top 5. If you have a team of 10 sellers, this is probably maybe 1 to 2 max if you have a really great team. So for the average person, and even for the top folks that want to get spun up really quickly, if you want to accelerate those folks, you need to share what great looks like. And for me, it's about that. It's not about, hey, stick to the script. This is, how do you know when you join a company or you join a new team or you want to get better and hear what the best folks are doing? What does great look like? And right now, again, the only way to see that is Gong's awesome or Chorus is awesome in terms of listening to what's been said before, but that's kind of all over the place. They're like the super structured library that pulls the latest thing. There's, Salesforce Ops, who's ever gone through a Salesforce Op and been like, yeah, this looks like a great deal. Right. Or like email threads or whatever. Even the win notes are kind of like, can you really understand what they did specifically? What stakeholders when, what emails went out to different people, the touch points across LinkedIn, text messages, calls, to really understand what goes into execution excellence. And I feel like that's, even as a leader where I've probably done the worst, is showing what great looks like. And that's why I think playbooks and process and scripts and all that stuff is awesome. You should take what the best people are doing, what the leaders would do if they were on the field, just document it. That should be the starting place. That should be the bar. And I always thought about it as this like super militant, like say these words, whatever, but like it's not fair to anyone on your team. You can't performance manage anyone on your team unless you can show them something that's crystal clear that you've pointed to say, at least do this and you will be successful. And I feel like I've taken that for granted and really value that because the average person, that's what's going to make, 80% of your team successful.
Yeah.
The bar is so high for you guys. You got to execute like a motherfucker in these deals.
Oh,
it's like,
shit. Yeah, we gotta bring the best
like
every
the customer's
time.
like, that's not Medic. You didn't close me. Where's the discovery? Like, yeah. It's
or the opposite. They forward around our notes all the time internally. Like we'll
Right.
send that, above the line ATL note early on to the right stakeholder, and they say they're slacking all these notes to each other. Like, why aren't we doing this? And I'm like, well, I'm sure there's someone at your company doing this. I'm sure if you sat down, you could document this. The hard part isn't that. The hard part's not thinking about these wow moments. The hard part is doing. Oh, there's some great quotes. Like, doing good consistently is so much harder than doing like excellence occasionally, something like that. And that's the truth. Like, doing a good job every single time on every single lead renewal, like that's the really freaking hard part. That's what we're trying to help people do. Yeah.
And how does our favorite topic? How does AI make that easier or harder for you in building the business and getting to that predictability, to driving, that behavior change? Like, what does that look like for you guys right now?
I think about AI as another tool in your toolbox, not necessarily like the thing. Like when you talk about AI companies, like it's so weird to me. It's like, but what do they do? Would they like? We lead even with the header. I'm like, do your customers, how much value you're providing that they care about AI as one of the 3 words that you're using to describe your business or the problem you're solving? So I feel like, obviously there's the up and down. AI. It's an amazing tool, just like mobile is, just like the internet, like just like all these things. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing tool. And I think for sales specifically, it's gonna augment the best sellers. The best sellers are gonna be even better. I think it's gonna be even harder for the average seller because now they're exposed to more data, able to send more things, able to do more. I think it's almost more overwhelming in terms of what you can do, right? And what I'm seeing is like even more spam that's worse than a template, because they're trying to use this more unstructured thing. But I think what I'm hearing from like the best sellers I know are stoked about looking at company reports and doing account planning based on the information, how efficient they can do maybe across 15 businesses versus 5. Like the best, that elite group of the top 10%, I think are doing even better. I think the average person is struggling more using AI because they don't have the foundations. It's like, here's another tool, but you don't know how to do the core job. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's like the gap between, it's like if we're thinking about the rich and the poor, right? Like it's creating like a larger and larger gap between your best and your worst.
Yep.
It's exactly
100%.
the same.
The AI wealth gap, that's a post you could do easily.
Yeah, AI wealth gap, there it is.
It's like it's a terrible analogy, but like think about if you're driving, like race cars and you're like, you have the standard models that people can drive, and then here's this like you're giving the average person like NOS, And you're like, good luck, go out and do this thing. You're like, how am I going to effectively do this thing? But if you're a professional driver and you get that, you're like, you're crushing it even more. So yeah.
There's something in that. I feel like maybe before we started, you were talking a bit about like, not only did those great sellers have the core foundational sales skills, but they're also maybe a little bit more data literate. They understand how to use the data, right? They have other skill sets that are making them more successful in sort of leveraging AI now that that's an option.
Yeah.
Like, can you speak a bit more to that and what you're seeing maybe in either the Accord sellers or with customers you're working with?
Yeah. I think it's always the top performers, well, consistent top performers, not someone that had, joined a great territory or whatever. Like the career top performers consistently are always trying to learn. They're getting better, right? The best people aren't just innate like that. Everyone will tell you it's a practice. And I think they look at AI, again, as another thing to get good at. Just like the top sellers typically don't need an SE to join a call. It's the same thing. Hey, I got more technical. I learned about these things. Okay, now I can do, again, more research, get more personalized because I can use, tools to make me more efficient. I think it's more about the efficiency than anything else for those top performers.
Do you plan to I feel like we've been talking around this concept of like the benefit or the opportunity for companies right now is to realize that that's a potential enablement gap, and that like internally you kind of start running like AI 101, right? And then you run AI 101 again, then you run it a third time, right? And finally people are learning a whole new skill set, right? To not make them great at generative AI or predictive and ML modeling, right? To make them good at potentially using AI within their tools. Like, are you thinking about that as you're enabling your sellers at Accord? What does that look like today?
To be honest, less so. My point of view, and maybe this is, differing from the average, is I rather spend time. I think the gap when I look at our customers, maybe not our team because we're smaller and it's easier to have an elite small team than it is to really scale that quickly, is I would spend more time on just the foundational stuff and doing the unscalable things really freaking well. And again, around the consistency than adding that. I think most teams are getting excited about that. I see a lot of enablement folks focused on this. And when I go to the enablement meetings and ops meetings, they're obsessed about this. But I'm like, your average seller doesn't even know what a business case means. Your average seller is still selling features and functionality. Your reply to leads time is atrocious, and you have the math on that. I think there's just so many core foundational value selling, just things that we all know that would be far more valuable net and less risky to do. So that's again, just maybe I'm old school with that. I just think there's so many low-hanging fruit things that I see across companies that would be easier to work on than that.
No, it's a great point. It's a really great point. Last year, actually, at this time, we're recording this podcast during Dreamforce and Inbound Week, but last year, like a year ago, Ben and I were speaking at Inbound, and what we spoke about was the fact that on the marketing side, right, marketing teams are still not like nailing inbound. Like they're still not nailing how to follow up with a lead and getting to like real smart enrichment from their forms to make sort of that speed to lead really faster. To your point, like when we're talking about like AI usage within marketing versus AI usage within sales, right? Nail the basics. It's still back to if you don't know how to do those basic things well and you're not doing those consistently, you layer on top and then you're just you're gonna be in a pit of sort of thrash and potential like distress as you try to get folks like ramped up on something that they're not ready for, right? If they don't have those sort of basic building blocks.
Like product marketing is a great example. Is like nailing your message and your positioning. People fly back past that and do a lot of like fancy demand gen things and spend a bunch of money. Is like, well, if you're not saying the right thing consistently that drives to a close, or maybe you're having a lot of conversations, spend all this money, but it's not gonna result in revenue. So.
You've been building this business for 4+ years now. How has like the market's approach to deal management shifted quite significantly, other than obviously huge new technology in AI coming on the scene?
I would say the biggest shift is probably less from a technology perspective and more from a market perspective, where people for a while didn't need or didn't have any of this rigor. It kind of went like out of vogue. I think a lot of these best practices that we're talking about now that are getting resourced and companies are spending millions of dollars doing force management, command of the message, spice, blah, blah, blah. All the best companies that are doing that, That stuff was like created in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and like forever sales stuff. And then you kind of had this place where it was like, buyers just want to buy themselves. It was because money was cheap and your end users could buy something because you didn't have any rigor around procurement and IT. That was a market thing, not a product thing in my mind. And so people thought the end all be all was this product-led sales motion where people would just buy it, start using it. That's because there was no rigor around budgeting internally. And then you saw this big shift where companies sometimes lost entirety of product market fit because of their go-to-market motion, or maybe it was great for end users, but there was no value prop and visibility for leadership, the people that actually now hold the budgets. So the shift that I've seen in the last 4 years since we started building is actually awesome for Accord. Maybe if we stayed down that path, people wouldn't be hardcore about business cases and mutual plans and account planning and rigor and understanding performance management and deal execution. What we're seeing is the reverse, is kind of the difference between, the best and the rest of the best people. Some of the best businesses like Figma went super hardcore around force management, and they're one of the, highest growing, fastest growing businesses in the last few years that had an amazing bottoms up motion. They layered on a tops down motion to sell to leadership and boards, and that's done incredibly well for them. And I think the best people are investing in that kind of stuff. Yeah.
What is the maybe most surprising way that you've seen people use it? I'm sure there's always like these sort of corner cases that pop up like, oh, that was not expecting that one, right?
The internal, I just assume there's a lot of great tools for like onboarding reps in this enablement world. And this is probably one of the biggest learnings in general, is just like how low the bar is from like an enablement tool perspective. And again, maybe it goes back to the fact that this was built for like ops and folks that are trying to like train the team, not help convert that to revenue. Yeah. It's kind of like if marketers were just focused on like booking conversations versus actually like joint to revenue, like the motion and the tools would be super different. That's kind of how it feels like in the sales space. Like this wasn't built for the seller. This wasn't built for the manager or the leader. It was built for decision makers. Yep. And just like looks good. And none of the workflows actually like map to like a seller's day to day.
Right.
Like here's this place, search up all the resources. We've dropped 10,000 things here at this big business. We have amazing search and tagging to find the thing. I'm like, well, why not just have it embedded into their process? This is the stage where we send this thing. Okay. Boom, put in the email or the deal, whatever. So that's been one of the most shocking things, is just like the bar for the support system for enablers that have very little to do with a rep's job of selling on the field, and almost is like an oxymoron. I feel like a lot of the stuff in ops and enablement for sales stops sellers from selling and focuses on all these internal things versus how do we move the conversation forward with the customer.
How do you continue, like you're sort of automating, right? Like this is yet another piece of the process that sort of further gets automated.
Yeah.
How do you continue to teach those sellers the core basics and the core principles while a lot of that work is sort of coming off their plate and being automated? How do you sort of like, balance between like the person in the loop and continue to grow sellers as a function and making it easier for them?
That's a great question. I think one of the best objections that we've gotten that was super frustrating, to be honest, from an amazing sales leader at one of our customers recently that joined as a VP. He was like, my biggest concern with the core, like I love the, value selling, all the stuff, old school guys, been selling for years, amazing. He's like, my concern is people feel like they're doing this stuff because they have an Accord, because I have this template business case, because I have these templates. Are you really doing the hard work? And that's where this comes down to, where most sales things succeed or fail, which is the frontline leaders. Is like this should help them better inspect. This should help them translate the vision of CRO, SVP, whatever, CEO to the field. This should help them, give them more visibility, be able to see not just is it getting done, but how well. And that's the hard part where you're never going to be able to automate. Going back to AI, blah, 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 like you're sending a lot more emails, great. You're doing it based on, is it good? And I think that's where you're never going to have, with, again, more upmarket, mid-market sales, people out of the loop. And it becomes about that quality. And culturally, what does good look like? How are we reinforcing that? That's kind of where I see technology marry people in a great way and making them more effective. Like, for example, let's say you're an upper mid-market frontline manager. You have 8 sellers. How many deals are they working at a time? Maybe 12, 4 or 5 that'll close in the quarter. How are you going to know, not just late stage in deals of like what we're going to bring in and work on the late stage deal, early in the deal, are they doing all the right little things? Have they gotten enough pain? Have they talked to the right people? Have we sent those above the line notes so that when we get mid stage, late stage, that we feel confident about it? And that's how I think about technology and automation helping kind of improve the quality of the execution earlier and giving them those superpowers versus we just did the thing, right? Because you always have that worry, which I think is a great objection of like, are we just putting this thing on rails, which should be like very honed in and absolutely nailing all that stuff. Yeah.
I really think the enablement programming around like for leadership is something that we can take away from this podcast episode. Like there's so much focus on like, oh, early stage career, people coming into the role, like onboard them and teach them how to do the thing. Well, hold on a second. Why don't you go like a few layers up and make sure that those people know how to do the thing?
Lever you have is your frontline leaders. That's what every top CEO I've ever talked to, any leader, is your frontline folks that are managing the 7 or 8 people. That's who builds the next generation of people. That's why people stay. That's why your top people might leave, is that frontline leadership and really supporting them. And I think we're getting a bit more back to that as we kind of like cut down some layers in certain companies and understand that, again, like the truth is in the decision makers on the field, and leaders, go founder mode and get more involved in the details.
Yep. And Lemkin sat in that exact seat 2 weeks ago and talked about how it's that like second line management team and being able to build a bench of these people to basically execute, right?
They're the ones running the company.
They're the ones do it. Yeah.
They're the ones doing it.
Right.
I feel like we haven't yet maybe heard some of your like hot takes on like trends you see sort of shaping the future of just like B2B sales generally.
Yeah. Okay. My hot take, and it kind of ties to Accord. Like, I feel like the bar for, like, how do I put it? Everyone talks about all these best practices, like all these LinkedIn influencers and companies, and it's part of their pitch. I don't think, because we've been talking about it more, there's been any shift in terms of how well that's actually done by the average seller. I still get the same shit outbound. I still get terrible pitches. When we onboard certain teams, the bar and expectation is super low. I feel like we've just gone debatably even further from those best practices, even though they're talked about more. And again, why we're really focused on how do you actually change the execution on the field of it, because I feel like the best practices are best, like, there's no secrets. This stuff works. Like the magic words and the incantations, as Kyle Norton calls it, and all this stuff, like it's been figured out. Human psychology, and I love Todd Capone because he talks about like every new trend we talk about in sales is like he can find from the frickin' 1910s, 1920s. Yeah. It all exists. It's humans are selling to humans and doing human things in business. There's nothing new. We maybe do it faster, more information. The hard part is the culture of excellence. The hard part is the standards that when you join a company, like this is what good, like I'm gonna care this much. I call like the give a shit factor. Yep. That's the stuff that matters. And I feel like, again, we just talk in circles and, about all these great things and how to do it. But who is out there? Who are the frontline? Are these frontline leaders talking about it? No, they're the ones, you're never gonna hear from them on LinkedIn. The best people are just going to be doing it every quarter, and that's the hard thing. And you say, oh, I stopped doing it, but I did it for a little bit. Like, no, like the people that get the credit that I respect the most are the people that do it every day and just talk about it. And if you're doing it every day, you're getting up at stand-up early. You're thinking about these things. You're coaching reps. You're finding time in between calls, the impossible things, listening to gongs that I find freaking impossible to do. That's what the best leaders are doing every day.
The best people are too busy to be influencers, right?
They're not thinking. They're obsessed over how to make their team successful and find the next reps to join their team, and that's the hard stuff.
And I love it how you talked about some of these sales principles are timeless. Our CEO, Henry, just tweeted a couple weeks ago that in Michael Dell's book, when he was running a newspaper, he was looking for people who recently got married. It's like a signal, right?
Yeah, I love that. I did listen. And that was that's the whole thing. And listen to or read How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
From when was that? The First or Second World War?
Yeah.
Was that written around the Depression for that?
Like 50s, 60s.
Yeah. That is just like you can be an elite seller practicing those principles in that book from the 40s. You don't need to like do any of this fancy stuff.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I actually should read it.
And then it comes back to culture and behavior is really the difference. Yes. Like we don't talk about go-to-market strategy, like the
culture and behavior.
Right? It's culture and behavior ultimately.
It is.
All the best practices are the same. Just keep doing those.
Yes,
right? But fix
the
the people. Yeah, give a shit factor. I'm gonna use that.
That's been my new thing. I was like trying to with my team.
When you were sitting down, we were talking about like what works, and maybe this is just less about like Accord's technology, more about your own go-to-market. Yeah. Feels like there's this huge shift around how people buy. Obviously, social and content play a big part of it. Yeah. You were sitting down and saying that, those are the channels that you're focused on. How do you think about, like what's working these days? And if you play it out, let's call it 2 years, what is working even better and what's working less well?
I think, and someone else was just talking about this, like doing the hard things is what works. Like finding, like, when everyone's zigging, you zag. Like finding the things that the average team and person can't do because you're going to rally your folks and do something different and harder. That's the stuff that works to me, is like more in person. For us, that's been the number one thing. It's harder getting a team to do that, to set up the meetings before, to get out there, meet with the right folks. And I'm telling you, CROs, the most senior leaders, are down to meet you because less people are doing that now. Less people are going to the office. Less people are driving their team to do some of these hard things. That's what I'm finding that works, is like sending less things but doing them really high quality. Like, we want our team to post on LinkedIn. Well, are they just going to reshare the stuff that we're putting out in the like it's going to be worthless. It's going to be less time them focused on their job and helping with marketing. But what's really hard is them to spend time thoughtfully reflecting on their unique career and their stuff about what we're doing. That's really freaking hard. But if you can do that, that's going to be your most efficient channel. So I think it's about finding those things that like tie to your value prop, that tie to your market and the people that care about you, and doing the challenging things, because no one else is going to be able to do that consistently.
And a quick follow-up question: how do you get your customers to do that marketing for you? It feels like we're moving towards a world in which people just like buy from the people they trust. They ask a friend. They go to G2. It's like a community-oriented purchase. Yeah. How do you operationalize your customers to actually just tell that story on LinkedIn for you?
I think it's two-part. One, you got to build the trust and the proof with them and make them successful and impactful and go above and beyond. And they're not buying a product; they're buying a result. I think we've gone very far away from that. Like, I didn't even know the SaaS world before starting Accord because I was in the infrastructure world. And that was just default. You don't get paid until your customers are fully ramped. So it was a very different psychology around sales.
Meaning Stripe
and post-sales.
Embed the payment API before.
Well, beyond that, you need to ramp that to the public. You need to get them to launch that on your apps. You have 3 sales processes. You have the deal, which you sign a term sheet, which means nothing. Then you have the implementation. Then you have the ramping out to everyone. But with SaaS, you can buy the thing and get paid, which is a crazy model. It's an awesome model, but also leaves the gap to not do a good job post-sale. So I think it's about that AE staying with it, whether or not that's a commercial model, not that being your culture at your company to deliver impact versus a signature.
Totally.
I think that's probably like the biggest lever that people have to become that. And then how do you have, I think like the Paul Graham classic, like do things that don't scale, just like work the best for this, even at big companies. Like, relationships are relationships. Like, it's going to be hard the person leaves. Yeah, it's really freaking hard. You should have people stay longer. Like, I don't think you can replace that and automate someone from another company because you have some G2 review automation to share that. Like, yeah, that might help a bit, but like nothing's like the person actually caring and checking in on them. And how do you build systems and signals around to help support those top people that are doing it?
You asked the motif question. We'll get you out of here.
Okay. So we got to our last question already. I feel like, well, one, like, thank you, Ross.
Thank you,
I mean, that's been awesome. I feel like we've like touched on both like philosophical conversation and like the state of the union in deal management. So I feel like we've run the full gamut. We want to ask you our sort of final question. We ask all of our guests. Yeah. So who is the smartest person you know, and what did you learn from them?
Yes, it's such a tricky question because I feel like I used to more think about smarts as like IQ, and now I think about smarts as just like the human, like a bunch of different dimensions. The thing that the 2 people actually came to mind, they're kind of one in my head, are like the founders of Stripe, John and Patrick Carlson. Obviously they're freaking geniuses, built this amazing technology, blah, blah, blah. But I think just the way that they built the culture of the company, just like very entrepreneurial, just very nice, genuine, kind people, almost to a fault in terms of like not having a lot of friction at work. Like, that to me is the definition of like super smart. So yeah, I would say them, just like approachable, nice people, blah, blah, blah. Like, founder mode done in the right way. They cared about the details obsessively, but I think that inspired and motivated more than it did like cause a negative thing, which I think a lot of people can kind of, confuse.
Yeah, they're both great follows on Twitter, amazing writers, clearly built an amazing company. Second time we've gotten that answer. That will be our first ever person who's been named twice. So shout out to John and Patrick. Thank you so much for coming on. This was really fun.
Thank you. This was super fun. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast.
With new episodes dropping every Monday and Thursday, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me and Ben on LinkedIn and visit zoominfo.com/labs to get in touch.